She was a ghost with no past. He was a phantom with too many. Their worlds collided in a place of silk sheets, locked doors, and mirrored lies. Then, silence. Until the smell led neighbors to marble walls that should have never been opened. Something was hidden. Something wasn't meant to be found. This wasn't love. This was design. What begins as seduction can easily slip into obsession. What masquerades as affection can conceal control. When power meets vulnerability, what remains of consent? This is the story of a girl who didn't officially exist, and a man who was never truly alive. Before we dive into this chilling international case of obsession, secrets, and psychological warfare, like this video and subscribe for more disturbing true crime documentaries that uncover the darkness behind the glamour. Lianna Tan was everything the world admired but barely understood. At just 21, she was a bright star at UCLA, pursuing a degree in artificial intelligence with dreams that stretched far beyond the classroom. Her passion was clear. She wanted to build a mental health tech startup, something that could bridge the silent suffering of millions with the promise of technology. Fluent in 6 languages, Lianna had become an internet sensation after a viral speech that wove together the threads of trauma and healing in the digital age, an eloquence rare for someone so young. But beneath the surface of this brilliant, poised student was a secret she guarded fiercely. Lianna didn't officially exist. Born in the shadowed corners of Manila, she was the product of desperation. Her mother had fled Singapore, scarred by a corruption scandal that destroyed their family's name. To escape, they had assumed forged identities and slipped into the United States undetected. Lianna had no birth certificate in California, no legal standing, no past to anchor her. She was a ghost, drifting through the corridors of a university, brilliant but invisible, vulnerable yet determined to carve out a future. Then came Arnaud Delacroix Banzumana, 47 years old, a French-Congolese man who carried more names and faces than anyone could count. Known to the shadowy underworld as Arnaud the Architect, he was a master of construction, not of buildings, but of people's minds. His reputation preceded him in criminal circles, a man who didn't just break bones but dismantled souls. Interpol had long sought him for the disappearances of informants across Europe. He was a phantom, elusive and dangerous. Their worlds collided in the digital ether. After Lianna's viral video exploded on TikTok, Arnaud's message slid quietly into her DMs, dark poetry, haunting charm, words that seemed to wrap around her like a spell. His voice was seductive, the kind that promised safety and power in equal measure. Within weeks, Lianna had left behind her fragile independence to move into Arnaud's fortress-like mansion in Beverly Hills, a compound layered with surveillance, security, and secrets. To the outside world, it looked like a fairy tale. Friends called it a Cinderella story, an exotic romance blossoming amid Hollywood's glitz. Lianna herself whispered about fate, as if destiny had woven their paths together. But behind the walls of that opulent prison, the truth was far more sinister. This was not a love story. It was an experiment, a simulation meticulously engineered by Arnaud, and Lianna was no willing participant. She was the subject of his most dangerous creation yet. Arnaud Delacroix Banzumana's reputation was not merely whispered in the dark corners of the criminal underworld, it was carved into the records of Interpol itself. He was linked to the mysterious deaths of at least 3 informants who had dared cross him across Europe. But these murders were only the surface of something far more chilling. Arnaud was a master architect of what those closest to his victims called emotional prisons. These were not physical cells, but invisible cages crafted from manipulation, isolation, and psychological warfare. Women who once held promise, or who became inconvenient liabilities, were ensnared, controlled, and ultimately erased from existence. Behind this cruel game was a sprawling network of operatives, experts in neuroscience, psychology, and covert surveillance, many of whom were exiles or disgraced professionals drawn into Arnaud's web by money or fear. At the center of this labyrinth stood one man who played a pivotal role in Lianna's descent, Rashan Kiante Miro, a Nigerian neuroscientist whose career had crumbled amid allegations of unethical experiments. Arnaud hired him to monitor every flicker of Lianna's emotional state, turning her life into a carefully calibrated experiment. The mansion, far from a refuge, was a laboratory of control. Hidden audio devices stitched into Lianna's clothing captured every word, every sigh, every breath. She was dosed covertly with microdoses of LSD, designed to fracture her sense of reality without her full awareness. Her sleep was meticulously manipulated, hours shortened, cycles disrupted, to erode her resilience. Her friends were erased from her world one by one, phone numbers deleted, social media accounts scrubbed, visits blocked. Arnaud planted psychological triggers deep within her psyche, invisible switches that would ignite anxiety, compliance, or confusion on command. Neuro-linguistic programming techniques conditioned her responses, weaving his control into the very fabric of her mind. What no one outside those walls understood was that Lianna was never meant to leave. She was trapped inside a prison behind glass, visible to the world but unreachable, a living experiment. Investigators who would later uncover the horrors called her Beta 7, a clinical label for one in a sequence of anonymous subjects Arnaud kept hidden. His trail stretched beyond Lianna. Of 6 other women linked to him, 3 had vanished without a trace, 2 were found dead under mysterious circumstances, and 1 was locked away in a psychiatric institution, her mind shattered. This was not love. It was control perfected. A sinister choreography where Lianna was both puppet and prisoner, caught in a web spun by a man who built emotional prisons and held the keys. The fragile illusion began to crack when Lianna discovered she was pregnant. Arnaud, ever the manipulator, had told her he was sterile, another lie layered in the fortress of deceit he had built around her. This revelation ignited a spark within Lianna, something long buried beneath the weight of control, hope, and with it, desperation. She realized that whatever grip Arnaud held over her, she needed to break free. Not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. Quietly, she began to document her reality. Using voice changers to mask her tone and encode her words, Lianna recorded diary entries detailing everything she endured. Each recording was a lifeline, a secret testament to her existence. But words alone were not enough. She compiled videos, photos, and documents, evidence of the psychological torment, the surveillance, the constant manipulation. She hid it all inside a hollowed-out lipstick tube, a small but ingenious vault against her captor's watchful eyes. That lipstick, once a symbol of beauty and allure, became a container of truth and defiance. Knowing she couldn't trust anyone around her, Lianna sent a backup of this precious data to one person she still believed could help, Zymra Fontaine. Zymra was a forensic psychology student from Compton, someone who understood the mind's darkest places. They had met through an online support group for survivors of abuse, and Lianna had confided in her carefully. Zymra became the tether to the outside world, the only person who might still see through the facade. Then, the silence grew ominous. Lianna missed a scheduled coffee date with Zymra, a small moment, but one that sent ripples through her friend's mind. Alarm bells rang loud and clear. Zymra, unwilling to wait, took matters into her own hands. She hacked into UCLA's campus security logs, piecing together Lianna's last known movements. Every swipe of a card, every recorded entry and exit point, painted a picture of someone who had slowly faded into the shadows. With a growing sense of dread, Zymra contacted the police. But her pleas for an urgent investigation were met with indifference. The response was cold and dismissive: rich folks fight dirty. The implication was clear: money and power could bury even the darkest secrets. The system she trusted refused to believe that a young undocumented woman could vanish without a trace from the grip of a man like Arnaud. Refusing to back down, Zymra took a step that blurred the lines of legality. Under cover of night, she broke into the sprawling Benedict Canyon mansion where Lianna had been held. The compound, a fortress of opulence and menace, seemed impenetrable. But inside, the silence was deafening. There was no sign of Lianna, only the faint scent of her presence, like a ghost lingering in the halls. Among the scattered remnants of her life, Zymara found the lipstick tube, hidden away as if waiting to be discovered. Inside it lay the encoded secrets, proof of a nightmare that went far beyond a simple disappearance. This lipstick was a key, a message from someone desperate to escape, a clue to unravel a mystery wrapped in control, fear, and the faintest glimmer of rebellion. The escape plan had begun, but the road ahead was dark, and the price of freedom would be far greater than anyone imagined. The contents of the lipstick tube revealed horrors that no one could have anticipated. The USB drive it concealed was a damning archive, a chilling testimony of Lianna's captivity and Arnaud's cold, calculated cruelty. Within its digital depths lay hours of footage showing Arnaud orchestrating Lianna's every word and movement like a puppeteer. In one recording, she repeated phrases that were etched into her psyche: "I don't exist unless you say I do." Another chilling line: "My baby is a parasite." These were not spontaneous confessions, they were commands drilled into her mind, designed to erase her identity and reshape her into a living ghost under Arnaud's control. But the darkest images were the most harrowing, scenes of electroshock sessions, where Lianna's screams echoed against the sterile walls of the hidden chamber. Arnaud remained disturbingly calm, his voice a cold undertone to the violent shocks pulsing through her body. The cameras captured every agonizing second, a brutal symphony of domination and despair. The final video on the drive was a nightmare carved in blood and silence. Lianna, naked and smeared with blood, screamed desperately as Arnaud recited verses from Les Fleurs du Mal, the decadent poetry of Baudelaire. His voice was eerily detached, reading lines about decay and desire while she writhed in pain and terror. The footage was both haunting and mesmerizing, a grotesque dance of power and suffering. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, the FBI moved swiftly. In a raid that shocked even seasoned agents, they stormed Arnaud's compound in Benedict Canyon. Cameras rolled as teams swept through the surveillance fortress, dismantling cameras and tearing down layers of deception. But the man at the heart of it all was nowhere to be found. Arnaud had vanished. Escaped like a shadow slipping through their fingers. News broke that Arnaud fled to Mexico aboard a private jet, vanishing across borders with the ease of a ghost. For weeks, he was a phantom, a name whispered in law enforcement circles but unseen by the public eye. Then came the unexpected turn. In Tijuana, Kwame Darius Mbenga, a Haitian-American tattoo artist, spotted him. Kwame wasn't a cop or a bounty hunter, just a man with sharp eyes and a sharp memory. He recognized Arnaud from a Netflix documentary that had profiled the case, his face burned into public consciousness. Without hesitation, Kwame confronted him, driving a screwdriver deep into Arnaud's thigh in a desperate act of citizen justice. Bleeding and stunned, Arnaud was quickly subdued, and Kwame wasted no time calling the authorities. Within 72 hours, the notorious architect was extradited back to California, shackled and silent. His capture sent through both sides of the border and ignited a media frenzy that would not relent. The evidence, the escape, the public's fascination with his cruelty, it all converged to paint a portrait of a man who was as elusive as he was dangerous. Arnaud was finally behind bars, but the scars he left, and the questions about the women who vanished under his shadow, were far from resolved. The case had only just begun to unravel. The courtroom was packed with a tense energy that seemed to vibrate through every corner as the trial of Arnaud Delacroix Banzumana, known to many now as the architect, commenced. It was quickly dubbed the trial of the century, a spectacle not only because of the gruesome nature of the crime but due to the layers of psychological manipulation, international intrigue, and a haunting tale of a young woman who never truly had a chance. Leading the defense was D'Angelo Crowther, a civil rights attorney renowned for his fiery rhetoric and unyielding dedication to his clients. Crowther wasted no time spinning a narrative designed to sow doubt and confusion. He claimed that Lianna Tan had staged her own death in a twisted act of psychosexual revenge, arguing that the whole case was a carefully orchestrated illusion designed to destroy Arnaud's reputation. To bolster this claim, Crowther brought in a pathologist whose report boldly suggested that the mutilated body found sealed behind the marble walls was not Lianna's at all, that it was a mismatched corpse, planted to frame the defendant. This audacious defense sent ripples through the courtroom, stirring whispers of controversy and disbelief. But the prosecution's case was meticulous, built on unshakable forensic evidence that pierced the defense's fog of deceit. DNA extracted from the fetus confirmed a direct biological link to Arnaud, a genetic fingerprint impossible to refute. Forensic experts detailed the painstaking analysis of the hair sewn into the victim's wounds, the intricate bindings on her wrists and ankles, and the blood spatter patterns, all tracing back unmistakably to Arnaud's presence and actions. Each piece of evidence formed a mosaic of brutality and control. More damning still were the items recovered from Arnaud's compound. A blood-stained copy of Les Fleurs du Mal, the same volume from which he had recited poetry during Lianna's torture, was presented to the jury, its pages smeared with red, a symbol of the macabre connection between art and violence. The prosecution played Lianna's voice memos, her tremulous but resolute diary entries recorded in secret, and surveillance hard drives filled with footage that exposed Arnaud's psychological torment and abuse. The court was flooded with a barrage of truth that left little room for denial. Central to the prosecution's emotional impact was the testimony of Zimmer Fontaine, Lianna's only friend and a forensic psychology student from Compton. She took the stand with a mixture of heartbreak and steely resolve. With tear-filled eyes, Zimmer recounted Lianna's gradual unraveling under Arnaud's grip, the slow extinguishing of her spirit, the cruel isolation, and the terrifying moments that led up to her disappearance. She detailed the secret messages Lianna had hidden, the encrypted pleas for help, and the desperate hope that Zimmer herself had clung to. Her testimony was a beacon of truth, cutting through the dense fog of the defense's narrative. After days of intense arguments, harrowing testimony, and relentless presentation of evidence, the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom fell into a hush, the weight of the case settling heavily on everyone present. But the verdict came quickly. Just 4 hours. The jury returned with a unanimous decision, guilty on all counts, including murder, aggravated torture, and psychological warfare. In the sentencing phase, Judge Alicia Monet-Robichaud's voice trembled with a mixture of fury and sorrow as she addressed Arnaud directly. Her words echoed through the courtroom, a harsh but fitting judgment for a man who had constructed a prison from love and left behind a trail of shattered lives. "You built yourself a world where women were toys," she declared, her eyes burning with conviction. "You murdered a girl whose only crime was loving you. You are hereby sentenced to life without parole, plus 122 years for aggravated torture and psychological warfare." The sentence was a final reckoning, a voice for Lianna when hers had been stolen. For Arnaud, it was the end of the line, a lifetime behind bars for crimes that shocked the conscience of a nation. But for those who followed the case closely, the story lingered as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind charm and the devastating cost when love becomes control. In the months following the verdict, the world couldn't look away. News anchors across continents referred to it as the architect's fall, a collapse not just of a man, but of an illusion, an empire of manipulation built brick by invisible brick. Arnaud Delacroix Banzumana, once whispered about in criminal syndicates as a ghost who could erase people without a trace, now sat alone in a fluorescent-lit cell at Pelican Bay State Prison, housed in solitary confinement for his own protection. His days were now regimented, his power stripped down to scheduled showers, rationed meals, and the occasional muffled scream echoing from down the corridor. For someone who once curated entire realities for his victims, the silence of isolation was a bitter end. But the trial's conclusion didn't mean the story was over. Zimmer Fontaine. No longer the overlooked forensic psych student from Compton, Zimmer emerged from the trial hardened, unafraid, and profoundly changed. With the small settlement she received from a civil suit against Arnaud's shell corporations, she founded the Lianna Project, a non-profit dedicated to supporting undocumented women who are at risk of psychological abuse and coercive control. The organization now operates shelters in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Manila, offering legal resources, therapy, and digital security training. It's a legacy Lianna herself never imagined, born from her suffering but aimed squarely at changing lives. Zimmer speaks at conferences, partners with trauma researchers, and has become the kind of effective advocate who forces systems to listen. Lianna's voice, once buried under shame and secrecy, now echoes through lecture halls and courtrooms. Her voice memos, digitally preserved and analyzed, are now used in forensic psychology programs across the globe. Students study her tonal shifts, her coded language, the subtle signs of coercion that many overlook. To some, she's a cautionary tale, to others, a martyr, but to every expert who's examined her case, she's proof of what happens when technology, secrecy, and unchecked power collide. And yet, for all the noise and activism and media saturation, the case remains riddled with haunting, unanswered questions. Chief among them, how did Arnaud know she was undocumented? There was no record of her Philippine birth. No digital footprint preceding her viral UCLA speech. She lived her life in the shadows, intentionally so. And yet, from the moment he contacted her, Arnaud seemed to know precisely how to push, isolate, and dismantle her. Theories abound. Some believe he had access to immigration blacklists or worked with traffickers posing as NGOs. Others suggest his network included compromised therapists, online psychometric profilers, or even AI tools used to scan for trauma patterns in public video uploads. Nothing has been proven, but the precision of his manipulation feels impossible without some kind of external data stream. Then there's the code name, Beta 7. Investigators initially thought it was an arbitrary designation, some twisted pet name or fetishistic label. But forensic linguists later discovered the term in two other classified reports, one tied to an unsolved disappearance of a Turkish art student in Marseille, the other connected to a woman found lobotomized in Johannesburg. Both had brief, romantic ties to men who fit Arnaud's description. Both had described feeling like test subjects before they vanished. In the files, the same word appeared, Beta 7. It became clear Lianna wasn't just a victim. She was part of a sequence. A continuum of controlled demolitions disguised as relationships. What was Arnaud building? That's the question investigators still whisper behind closed doors. Some believe it was a psychological experiment, an unofficial MK Ultra revival, mapping trauma response across cultures. Others think he was trying to engineer dependency, creating programmable emotional states for blackmail or espionage purposes. The most disturbing theory is also the simplest: he wasn't building anything at all. He was destroying methodically, because destruction gave him godhood. One name. 7 women. That phrase was scribbled in a note found tucked inside a burnt journal in Arnaud's private library in Lyon, discovered months after the trial. No signature. No date. But it confirmed what many feared: Lianna wasn't the first, and she may not have been the last. The world moved on, but the scars remained. Not just on the people, but on the narrative of what love can look like in the wrong hands. It taught us that evil doesn't always arrive with a knife. Sometimes it enters through poetry, charm, and meticulously curated affection. Sometimes, it doesn't kill outright, but rewires. And somewhere in that blank white cell, Arnaud still smiles. Still silent. Still watching, perhaps, in his mind. Because control doesn't always end with a verdict. Sometimes it lives on in the questions that never stop echoing. This was never just a story about a murder. It was the autopsy of a design. An architecture of manipulation, fear, and precision, constructed by a man who didn't raise fists, but realities. Arnaud Delacroix Banzumana didn't kill Lianna Tan in a fit of rage. There was no chaos in it. No loss of control. He did it because she became aware. Because freedom, to him, was a virus, something to isolate, contain, and extinguish. Control wasn't just his tactic. It was his theology. And Lianna's resistance, however quiet, was heresy. She wasn't supposed to leave that house. She wasn't supposed to be pregnant. She wasn't supposed to outmaneuver him, not even a little. But she did. She documented. She encoded. She reached. And though she didn't live to see it, her story detonated everything he built. What Zymra Fontaine did wasn't just brave. It was historic. She cracked open a silence so carefully engineered that even law enforcement looked the other way. She gave language to the invisible. She taught us that sometimes justice doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins in the gut of someone who refuses to ignore their instinct. But the shadows remain. The term Beta 7 is still unexplained. The others, those 6 names investigators haven't yet matched to missing persons reports, still haunt case files and forensic boards across Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. We may never know how many versions of Arnaud's projects are still unfolding in the dark. And so we're left with the most chilling question of all: what if Zymra hadn't acted? How many more lives would have been reduced to test subjects? How many more women would have smiled in videos, unaware they were already part of a simulation engineered to break them? Lianna Tan lived in the cracks of legality, identity, and visibility. An undocumented genius with no safety net, no paper trail, no system designed to protect her. And that's what made her the perfect prey. Because sometimes it's not the loud ones who are most at risk, it's the brilliant, quiet ones. The ghosts among us. The one society never documents until it's too late. If this story unsettled you, it should. Because somewhere, someone else is disappearing just like Lianna did, softly, slowly, without sound. And if her scream reached you through all this, if it rattled something deep inside, then don't let it end here. Subscribe for more true crime cases where obsession, power, and secrets collide. And above all, pay attention to the ones who vanish without notice. They're often the ones screaming the loudest.